You are wandering far from home when you encounter a fairy which offers you a simple meal of bread and butter. Should you accept it? At first, many might say no, assuming the gift of food from fairies is dangerous. And there is good reason for this. In a ballad, Merlin, for example, warned the protagonist who was setting into fairyland that drink a drop or bite a bit while in Elfland, and you will never see Middle Earth again. Lady Wilde points out that in Ireland it was believed that to eat fairy food was fatal. And often fairy food turned out to be foul and dangerous things glamoured to appear to be food. So, yes, at first glance you might think you should avoid eating fairy food. Yet nothing in fairyland is so simple as this, for the fairies are our neighbours, and they frequently care about us, and wouldn't always offer us dangerous food. One man was struggling to feed his family. When he was returning home one evening over the hill, he encountered a woman who asked him why he was grieving. He told her that it was because he couldn't earn enough to feed his family, and she told him that if he would send his son to watch over her cattle during the days, she would give him plenty of money. He agreed to have his son work for her, and she took him underground to heaps of gold, wheat, and beef, so he filled his pockets and returned home. The next day he sent his son to watch the woman's cattle, and at dinner time the woman came and fed the young man a meal more wonderful than he had ever eaten. At other times, ploughmen would be doing their work, and at the edge of the fields they would smell something delicious cooking, and would comment that they would like some of it. Later, the fairy who lived under the ground at these points would leave them a cake or some bread or something else to eat. In another story, in the Alps, an old fairy gives some lost children food and keeps them safe through the winter. So often, fairies did give people food and the people afterwards were completely fine. Indeed, sometimes not accepting food from the fairies could lead to them feeling insulted so that they would punish you for it. In Scotland, for example, a ploughman, while engaging in his work, thought he heard the sound of butter being churned, and mentioned that he would like a drink of buttermilk. That's when a woman appeared to him in a green dress. Being startled by her sudden appearance, and of course, the fact that she probably was a fairy, he refused the drink. She was so offended that within a short period of time after, he had died. This is not an atypical type of story. There are a number of other stories from Scotland and many other places where refusing a fairy's offer of food leads to some sort of punishment. In one story from the Isle of Man, there was a thirsty woman who, ignorant of fairy customs, penalty attending their infringement, declined a kind offer of refreshment, and immediately found herself a prisoner in the hillock. Here she was told that when she had eaten all the meal the fairy provided her, and spun all the wool, she would be able to return home. So she began spinning and eating as quickly as she could. But no matter how much she ate, the meal did not disappear, nor did the wool. Another captive, an old man, told her that she needed to wet her eye with her saliva each morning before settling into her task. She followed this advice, and gradually the wool and meal were exhausted, and so she gained her freedom. Again, in this story, the woman refused the fairy's food, and as punishment, she was forced to eat food until it was gone, at which point she was able to gain her freedom. It's important to remember that while fairies were potentially dangerous neighbors, again, they were our neighbors. We see this very clearly in stories like one from Brittany, France, where a fairy family lived underneath the house of a human family. One night, when there wasn't any food left and the human child was hungry, the child's mother told her to knock on the hearth and ask for some bread. A moment later, the fairy handed up some bread for the child and her parents, but told the child not to give the bread to anyone else. So we can kind of come to the conclusion that if you are in fairyland, or there is a fairy party, the food is potentially dangerous. But if you are in the human world, and are being offered a humble meal, it is generally dangerous not to eat. Except this isn't entirely satisfying. Which leads us to a more abstract question. Why does eating food at a fairy party or deep in fairyland lead to imprisonment? In the lore of much of the steppes, from which the Indo-Europeans likely hail, when a shaman went to rescue someone from the land of the dead, if that person had eaten food There, they were trapped, and there was no getting them out. Eating food in the land of the underworld, then, was a sign that you accepted your place within it. This, of course, explained why shamans couldn't heal many of the people they went into the land of the dead to rescue. We can see some vestiges of this idea within European lore as well. In one Irish story, a woman was taken to fairyland and appears as a ghost to tell her husband, "Do not be disturbed, dear husband," said the appearance. "I am now in the power of the fairies, but if you only have courage and prudence, we may soon be happy with each other again. Next Friday will be May Eve, and the whole court will ride out of the old fort at midnight. I must be there along with the rest. Sprinkle a circle with holy water, and have a black hafted knife with you. If you would have courage, pull me off the horse, and draw me into a ring. All they may do will be useless. You must have some food for me every night on the dresser, for if I taste one mouthful with them, I will be lost to you forever." Okay, so we clearly see that this woman, or at least her ghost, is coming to her husband every night to eat so that she doesn't end up eating in fairyland, at least until he can rescue her. In another story, a woman named Bridget, about 19 years of age, fainted in the street. The poor girl never rose from it more. Maybe a week she was lingering, dying. Not a word ever came from her lips. Not long after burying her, her mother heard a rapping on the window, close upon midnight. She rose and says, "Oh, Bridget dear, is that you?" "It is indeed, mamma," says a voice. "Let you give me a drink of sweet milk and a small taste of bread." "I've heard tell that the dead were uneasy, but never one needing food," says the mother. "The fairies have me away," answers Bridget. At this point, she says that she is still alive and that what was buried was an old changeling thing. She too needs human food in order to avoid being taken by the fairies forever. In another Newfoundland story, some girls who have been taken into the underworld are avoiding being held there forever by sneaking off when they can to eat human food, essentially living as ghosts, neither in the underworld with the fairies or in the land of the living. Fairies too often needed human food, and there is some magic in the food of humans. In an Irish story, a fairy queen is fretting her life out for want of some milk that has the scent of green grass in it, and the fresh upper air. In Denmark, people would often see the troll dancing at night. However, one of these told a man that they were going to move. When he inquired why, the creature told him that they couldn't survive anymore, for they had been surviving on stealing human food. But people had started putting the cross over everything, and so the trolls were starving to death, and now seeking land where they could get human food. Fairy food, at least the fairy food from the underworld, is insubstantial. It exists in sort of a liminal state, and is essentially dreamlike, or illusionary. Thus it is something to be avoided. On the other hand, while many fairies have connections to the land of the dead, or other liminal spaces, many dwell within our world, or a place of paradise, so their food can be the same or better than ours. So when you are offered fairy food, you must ask yourself what the source of their fairy food is. Is it the underworld, the paradise realm that is better than ours, or our world itself? And this will help you determine whether you should eat it or not. It is difficult to tell, of course, but you can generally trust fairies if they are giving you food out of sympathy, as payment for your work or goods, or they are fairies that live close enough to you that they have at least heard you talking and living. They aren't trustworthy if they are currently acting flippant and perhaps a bit silly, or you have entered the other world without some sort of agreement beforehand. This still doesn't answer the question we began with. What do you do if you are far from home and a fairy offers you food? The problem with this scenario is that there isn't really any good stories that would give us an indication. These fairies aren't your neighbors, and sometimes traveling to distant worlds was the same as traveling to another world. least insofar as the fairies were concerned, so they might be dangerous. On the other hand, fairies did often help travelers. So flip a coin and hope that luck gives you the right answer. For sometimes, fairyland is just dangerous or confusing. Also, if you survive this type of encounter, please say something so that we can all learn.